The glow of the television cast shadows across James Edwards' dimly lit living room as the KCAL 9 News anchor's voice filled the space. Breaking news tonight as California faces what officials are calling the worst drought crisis in recorded history. Governor Nathan Walsh has just declared a state of emergency, implementing unprecedented water restrictions across all counties. Here's Sandra Chun with more details. The screen cut to a reporter standing in front of what used to be Lake Oroville, now nothing more than a vast expanse of cracked earth and scattered puddles. Thank you, Tom. I'm standing at what remains of Lake Oroville, once California's second-largest reservoir. As you can see behind me, water levels have dropped to historic lows, forcing state officials to take drastic action. Starting next week, residential water usage will be strictly limited to 40 gallons per person per day. Those exceeding this limit will face penalties starting at $500 per violation, with fees increasing exponentially for repeated offenses. The camera panned across the dusty lakebed as Sandra continued. Agricultural operations, which consume 80% of the state's water supply, will see mandatory 60% reductions in water allocation. The California Water Resources Control Board estimates that these measures could lead to the fallowing of over 1 million acres of farmland. James Edwards, senior water systems engineer with 20 years of experience, threw his empty coffee mug across the room. It shattered against the wall, the sound barely registering over his fury. He knew better. He'd spent the last decade proposing solutions: desalination plants along the coast, modernized aqueduct systems, groundwater recharge projects. Every single proposal had been blocked, delayed, or buried in endless environmental impact studies. The reporter's voice droned on. In related news, Pristine Waters Corporation, led by CEO Stuart Renner, has announced a revolutionary new water purification system that they claim will help address the crisis. The system will be implemented across all major municipal water treatment facilities within the next month. James leaned forward, his engineering instincts suddenly alert. Something about this didn't add up. He'd reviewed every major water treatment technology in development, and he'd never heard of this system. How had it been approved so quickly? And why now? His phone buzzed, a text from his old college roommate, Dr. Mark Jones at the State Water Quality Lab. James, we need to talk. Something's wrong with these water samples. Meet me tonight. Usual place. 8 p.m. James stared at the message, then back at the TV where Stuart Renner's polished face now filled the screen, speaking about necessary sacrifices for the greater good. A chill ran down his spine as he noticed something in Renner's eyes, a cold calculation that seemed at odds with his concerned words. Outside his window, a digital billboard flickered to life, displaying the day's water usage statistics for his neighborhood. Below it, in bold red letters, "Conservation is survival. Do your part." James grabbed his keys. He had 4 hours until his meeting with Marcus, and a gnawing feeling that this drought was about to reveal something far more sinister than empty reservoirs. Later that evening, in the penthouse suite of the Pristine Waters Corporation headquarters, Stuart Renner gazed out over the Los Angeles scenery, a glass of perfectly filtered water in his hand. Behind him, Philip Bates settled into a leather armchair, his tablet displaying data from water treatment facilities across the state. "Tell me, Stuart," Philip began, his voice carrying the practiced smoothness of a tech mogul. "How are your almond orchards handling the new restrictions?" Renner turned from the window, a smirk playing across his features. "Restrictions? What restrictions?" He chuckled, taking a sip of water. "When you own the rights to every major watershed in the valley, drought declarations become mere suggestions. My farms will continue operating at full capacity while the rest struggle to keep their crops alive. And the outcry? Let them cry. They'll be too busy counting their gallons to notice that my operations use more water in a day than some towns do in a month." Renner set his glass down on the marble-topped desk. "Though I must admit, I'm concerned about the purification system rollout. Someone might eventually realize it does nothing to increase the water supply." Philip waved his hand dismissively. "That's already taken care of. Every major news outlet will run stories about the system's effectiveness. Social media algorithms will bury any criticism under an avalanche of paid content praising its implementation. Besides," he added, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "increasing the supply was never the point, was it?" "No," Renner agreed, his expression hardening. "The compound is already showing promising results in the test areas. Fertility rates dropping by 40% in just the first 3 months. The best part? They're blaming it on stress and poor nutrition. And the hormonal changes? Better than we expected. The men become more docile, less likely to question authority. Testosterone levels plummet within weeks of exposure. Women of childbearing age show reduced fertility markers across the board. Renner picked up a report from his desk. Our scientists estimate that within 5 years, birth rates in treated areas will drop by 75%. Philip nodded approvingly. For the good of humanity. And the compound itself? Undetectable? Breaks down into harmless-looking metabolites within hours. Even if someone tests the water, they'll need to know exactly what they're looking for to find it. Renner paused, then added, though we should probably do something if anyone starts asking questions. That researcher at the State Water Quality Lab. Dr. Jones, was it? He seems to always ask too many questions. Already handled, Philip replied, checking his phone. By this time tomorrow, Dr. Jones will have accepted a very generous offer to lead a research facility in Antarctica. And if he declines, he left the sentence unfinished, but its meaning hung heavy in the air. The two men stood in silence for a moment, looking out over the city they were slowly poisoning, raised their glasses in a mock toast to their success. The neon sign of Jerry's Diner flickered in the growing darkness as James pulled into the nearly empty parking lot. Through the window, he could see Mark Jones hunched over a corner booth, his usually pristine lab coat wrinkled, dark circles under his eyes suggesting he hadn't slept in days. James slid into the booth across from his old friend. Before he could speak, Mark pushed a manila envelope across the table, his hand trembling slightly. "Keep your voice down," Mark whispered, glancing nervously at the few other patrons. "What I'm about to show you, it's not possible. It shouldn't be possible." James opened the envelope, pulling out several charts and chemical analysis reports. His engineering background allowed him to understand the basics, but some of the molecular structures were unlike anything he'd seen before. "The top sheet is from our regular water quality tests from 6 months ago," Mark explained, pointing to the first page. "Standard stuff, minerals, pH levels, the usual contaminants. Now look at the bottom one. This is from yesterday, after they installed Renner's new purification system." James compared the reports, his frown deepening. "These compounds, they're not just purifying the water?" Mark shook his head, pulling out another document. "That's just it. The system isn't primarily about purification at all. Look at these molecular structures. They're designed to interact with human hormones, specifically targeting reproductive and endocrine systems. But here's the truly terrifying part. He pulled out a final sheet, hands shaking more visibly now. These compounds, they're self-replicating. They don't break down in the body like normal chemicals. They accumulate, building up over time. "Jesus," James breathed, studying the data. "And this is going into almost every major water supply?" "Already is. But there's more." Mark leaned closer, his voice barely audible. "I ran some projections based on these concentrations. Within 6 months, we could see massive drops in fertility rates. Within a year, the changes to human physiology will be irreversible. They're not just controlling the water supply, James. They're weaponizing it." A waitress approached their table, and both men fell silent, quickly gathering the papers. After she left, Mark continued, even quieter than before. "I've got samples. Real proof. They're in my lab, along with all my original data. I'm going to." The diner's door chimed as 3 men in dark suits entered, scanning the room with calculated precision. Mark's face went pale. "They're here," he whispered, shoving a key card into James's hand under the table. "Lab 4B. West Wing. The samples are in the—" "Dr. Jones?" One of the suits approached their table, his smile not reaching his eyes. "I'm Dr. Harrison from the Global Health Initiative. We're very excited about your acceptance of the research position in Antarctica. The helicopter is waiting to take you to the airport." James watched helplessly as his friend was led away, Mark's last desperate glance telling him everything he needed to know. The samples in Lab 4B and that analysis work were now the only evidence of what was really in the water, and the only hope of exposing the truth. As he gripped the key card in his pocket, James realized with grim certainty that he wouldn't be sleeping tonight. He had to get to those data files before they disappeared, along with anyone else who knew the truth.